We'll talk about that.
It's quite poor. Hello and welcome. My name is Ian. This channel is all about music and art, and this is where we talk about music and art. And in this video I'm going to look back at what's happening regarding music streaming in the UK. And over the last couple of months, the UK government's Digital, Culture, Media and Sports Committee have been looking into the way that streaming platforms and large record companies manage payments to songwriters, musicians and performers. And on the 15th of October 2020, Parliament published a news article stating that this particular committee would inquire into the impact of streaming on the future of the music industry. The article stated that the inquiry will consider whether the government should take action to protect the industry from piracy in the wake of steps taken by the EU on copyright and intellectual property rights. I knew that some high-profile musicians were giving evidence to this committee, and the first of these meetings was on the 24th of November and another meeting on the 8th of December. Now these meetings were long, lasting over 3 hours each. So what I've done is I've edited them down into shorter videos, and I have put direct links to the questions in the description down below, which will make it easier for you if you want to look at a specific question and not watch the whole thing. And it's worth providing a background to the witnesses giving evidence to these sessions. And in the first session we had Tom Gray, who is the founder of the Broken Record campaign, which is an artist-led movement on Twitter using the hashtag Broken Records, and highlights the low per stream royalties and has gained significant engagement from musicians, music fans and the media. And it highlights the discussion within the industry about the problems that streaming royalty distribution and how it could be addressed. And in his day job, he's a vocalist, guitarist and songwriter for the band Gomez. We also had Colin Young, who is a streaming auditor and accountant from his own company, CC Young & Co., where he specialises by acting for clients in the music and the entertainment sector. And lastly, in this first session, we had Tom Frederikse, who is a partner in Clinton Solicitors and is dual qualified as a UK solicitor and a New York attorney. And Tom is recognised as a leading practitioner in digital media and technology related matters, who works on a wide range of commercial and media matters. He regularly deals with IP issues including copyright, trademark, brand protection, rights, licensing, data protection and information security. All of the sessions were chaired by Julian Knight, and the complete list of committee members and the relevant links are in the description down below. Now this recording is made in agreement with the UK Parliament Terms and Conditions, which state that I cannot alter the video or the audio of the recording in any way. I can't use this material for satire or use it on websites or social media platforms that promote, encourage and facilitate illegal activity and encourage hatred and antisocial behaviour. So here is part 3 of session 1 from the 24th of November 2020 into the economics of music streaming. Damien Green.
Thank you, Chair, and morning everybody. We talked a lot about the big labels and how they're dominant and so on, and to some extent this feels like a sort of discussion that could have been had literally at any time in the sort of 65-year history of rock and roll. It's, you know, Buddy Holly and Norman Petty arguments about who wrote the songs and all kind of thing. But if we concentrate just on the streaming services, I'm interested if there's any effective differentiation between them. Streaming services like Tidal sort of present themselves as a bit hipper and a bit more artist friendly. Is there any difference between any of them, Tidal or Deezer or these ones that try and be hipper? Tom Frederikse had his hand up first.
Yeah, I think we could say that the division is between Tidal, Deezer, Apple Music, Spotify, and a few others that are primarily subscription services, primarily delivering audio music. And then there's another tier of services like YouTube that have a huge amount of user-generated content, have video, and other elements that aren't present in the straightforward music services.
But other Tom, I mean, from an artist's point of view, is there any difference between them?
Not particularly, I'm sad to say. They pay out at different rates, and curiously, sometimes you're getting paid at a higher rate by a different service for reasons that are sort of inexplicable. Often to do with the age of the listeners on a particular service. I think on Amazon, the listeners tend to be a little older, so they tend to listen a little less, so the payouts tend to be a little higher, curiously. You know, there's all these sort of strange economic effects that happen because of the levels of listening and the fact that the total amount of revenue is always divided up by the total number of streams.
I would mention that it's also if you look across Europe, in Northern Europe, it's predominantly premium, whereas as you go south, it then becomes advertised. So, and I spoke about the distinction in the rates 5-1. So I think there is social economic factors of the listener, and also just the way they like to enjoy their music. So that is a big difference, and we see, for example, on Apple pays per stream on average a lot more than Spotify, but the dominant player is Spotify. And what I would say is, with those platforms, they have transformed the music industry. So I recognize that, yes, Spotify's objective is not to make a profit, it's to have market share. But my goodness, has it transformed the industry? When we went from physical CDs to downloads, the record industry went off a cliff. It was 40% of turnover just disappeared overnight. And within 5 years, it was on its knees. So Spotify, Apple, Deezer, they have transformed the recorded music industry. They've brought it back. And I would also, why are the three majors so dominant? I think it's a combination of resources, but they are good at what they do. You have to recognize that their marketing and promotion, they are good at that. They have good A&R skills, they understand the market, and then they're good at entering artists into the market. So they do sustain it. It's not as though we can live without the major record labels. No, we can't. They are important to it. But what from acting from primarily the artist point of view, my concern is is it equitable, the split between recording artist and record label? And one of my observations was I was looking at the Warner's results, financial results, because they're on the US Stock Exchange, so it's on public record. But when I look at the A&R costs as a percentage of turnover, so how much are they investing into the creative element, the very juice that's going to feed the whole industry? I looked at 2017 and that was 31.92. In 2018, it's 31.37. In 2019, it's 30.68. And in the last 6 months, it's gone down to 28.03. So there is
percentages.
A decline in the amount as a proportion of turnover, how much Warner's is investing in its creation of new material.
Okay, and Frederikse, thank you.
Very quick comment on your first point about 65 years of labels. You're right, things have not changed in that respect. The relationship with labels and artists has been largely the same. If anything, it's improved in the artist's favor over that huge amount of time. And no one is suggesting that there should be a wholesale change to the infrastructure here. Labels are needed. They're very good at what they do. And many artists are thankful that they have the backing of that major corporation. What we're talking about only is that over the last 20 years, in particular the last 5 years, since there's been a recovery in the music industry down to streaming, because of the issues that we've discussed earlier this morning regarding supply costs and so forth, there does seem to have been a shift in the resulting profits. And there are a number of ways that the government could address this. One of which, as we said, is equitable remuneration. And I think it's difficult to not to recognize that expanding the mandate of the PPL in the UK, that's what ER is, would go some way towards leveling up and creating wider opportunity within the UK music industry.
Somebody's made the good point that either curated radio or playlist, which is a halfway point. And I'm conscious as a Spotify subscriber, I spend a lot of my time listening to playlists because it's the lazy way to do it. Is there a way an artist can get on playlist? And I mean, again, sorry, think back to the old days of payola and radio and things like that. I mean, are there nefarious practices that people do to make sure they get onto those Sunday afternoon relaxing playlists and so on?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, no, there's for years there's been people running playlists that are successful who essentially you have to be friends with in some way in order to get onto their playlist. And that's been going on. Of course, Spotify would frown upon that and would say it's not what's happening, but clearly nepotism and payment does change hands. I know it does. So it's but there's also going to be a question going forward because Spotify have just said that they're going to have this reduced rate for marketing where they'll pay us an even lower rate if they advertise our music internally. And if you think about what's happening there, that's them saying, well, we'll push your music to the front and pay you less. That's an exchange of value for putting your music at the front. So is that not a little bit analogous with payola as well? We're in sort of choppy waters with a lot of the practices that are happening in terms of how music gets put to the best shelf, shall we say, in the shop.
Yeah, and the solution for that, as ever, is data. What data would be important for either the labels or indeed the artists when it comes to streaming? What can't you get hold of that you'd want to get hold of?
It's very untransparent. It's almost impossible to find out anything. All the deals between the DSPs and the labels are shrouded in NDAs. Most artists have auditing rights in their contract, which, I mean, Colin will tell you how easy it is to actually act upon our auditing rights. Colin?
The data that I require is obviously we're talking of billions of streams, and I need the data and I need it in a standardized format. I need it to be consistent because when I'm trying to compare recording with publishing, I'm comparing mechanical with public performance, I need it to be in a similar and standardized format. So I need the date or the month of the play. But quite often what I get is when they processed it, so when they actually got round to entering the data. So when I'm trying to compare one with t'other, it's not there. And then when I look at the platforms, I then need to know the subscription rate. I need to know that exact. And that is they're very reluctant in giving me that granular data. So what will happen is that in the case of Universal, they have a deal with Spotify, but that'll be in Holland. So the information in its granular format is there, but when I conduct my audit is restricted to the books and records of London. So it's what files they then choose to pass over. And I don't get back to source. I'm never entitled to get back to that source data. So really what I'm doing is I'm looking at data that's been transferred from one file internally from Holland to London. And then the data I get is then often in a format that is difficult for us to use. Now there is an entity, Digital Data Exchange, DDEX, and that is a body that defines what data should be presented in what format. And that's what Spotify provides. So as the auditor, that's what I'd like to get at. So when I give formal audit notice, I would then like to get those digital data files as delivered by Spotify to label, rather than a summary or an interpretation of them. I need that granular data that was provided.
And do you get that now?
No. It's much resistance, and it's There's always reasons why it's not available. So I'm always having to make compromises in the audit. I can never do what I'd like to do. It comes with limitations. That's the problem. The audit is there. It's to provide a remedy. It's to remedy mistakes, errors, misunderstandings. And it's both ways. There could be a counterclaim. So I'm not saying, either side is perfect. Absolutely not. What I'm saying is I need the data to be standardized and consistent, and I need it granular, and I need it at source. I need to be able to go back to Spotify what they gave later.
I mean, if an auditor, a traditional auditor auditing some financial accounts had this kind of lack of transparency, you wouldn't declare that you'd audited it.
I'm a registered auditor, so I'm very familiar with going back to source documents. That's my discipline. That's why I'm frustrated. So when I do royalty audits, it is frustrating for me. Getting that level of detail and in a standardized format is difficult.
Okay, final thought then, Alex, the chair. Tom Frederikse, you've had your hand up.
Lack of data and lack of transparency and NDAs certainly are a problem in this industry, as they are in many industries, but it is fiendishly difficult for government to intervene to force data for an industry to get its act together in creating good data. There is a need for this, but I would urge the committee to recognize that it's very, very difficult for government to intervene in this way. And even if you did have an inclination to make that recommendation, then please keep in mind that the US Congress has already beat you to it. The US government has actually created law that requires the industry to create a massive database, which most in the industry, everyone welcomes it, but we all wonder if it's even possible. So over the next year or two, we will see if this is possible or not, and it might be better for the UK to give way, seeing as the US has already taken up this mantle.
Thank you. Fascinating. Chair.
Heather Wheeler.
Thank you very much, Chair. Social media platforms like YouTube and TikTok operate very differently to music streaming platforms, in that music streaming is a significant but otherwise incidental part of its service. Are there unique issues posed by YouTube and TikTok to the music industry that other streaming platforms don't have? You're mute, Tom. TG.
Absolutely. Sorry. I'm not sure that they are incidental. 8 of the most streamed videos on YouTube ever are music videos. People listen to music, go to YouTube to listen to music. Safe Harbor provides a get out of jail card free for Google from copyright and competition law. They are, I've seen estimates that put as a streaming service, they are streaming 51% of the world's music. If they were a music company, they would be broken up as a monopoly. And that music, they're saying they don't have to properly license in the normal way because they didn't put the music there. Hey, we didn't put it there, but we're not responsible for that. And of course, that's what the European Copyright Directive was brought into. And then the last British Conservative government supported us in bringing through Europe was to try and close that down. It's a curious problem when one of the world's biggest corporations is able to not pay the people who make the stuff that they platform. My friends who are songwriters, I mean, we should talk. The plight of the songwriter is not great at the moment. They make in subscription models. They make about £850 per million plays. But a friend of mine just audited his catalogue and came out with £450 per million streams. Now that compares to his audit of YouTube, where he's making this is a very successful Scottish songwriter, and he's making £70 per million streams on YouTube. The continuation of Safe Harbor is well, it's up to you, but it's an obscenity as far as I'm concerned.
Right. Bizarrely, that was going to be my third question, so I think you've done that one for me. But so my second and final question then, has YouTube's business model, which has allowed people to watch ad-supported music videos since before the emergence of Spotify, actually influenced the development of today's streamlining ecosystem?
That's anybody's guess. I think obviously it has. I think it's changed the way that people listen to music and how they choose to listen to music. And of course, there's an important thing here, because a lot of what's happening on YouTube is very algorithmic as well. YouTube is deciding for you what the next video that gets played is a lot of the time. And so is equitable remuneration occurring in YouTube? I think it is.
That's interesting. Just to finish, you did talk about the safe harbour thing. So BPI have written to us about that. Do you think that these safe harbours, how they work, is it possible to exempt creative industry products from them? Is that where the American issue is coming in, or is that different?
Do you know, Tom? Could you answer this one?
It's incredibly difficult to find wording that will catch exactly what we're trying to catch and not have unintended consequences. Europe has had a bash on it, but witness how difficult all the implementation processes are in each of the countries. We haven't actually seen that wording yet. We will see. And the world's eyes are on those implementations to see if wording can be somehow effective. Your point about Steve Ryan's point about watching these music videos and feeling like a bit of a criminal while you watch them. I personally have never felt that on Spotify or Apple or Tidal or Deezer because I've parted with £10. But on YouTube, maybe I do have some sympathy for that feeling.
That's really helpful. Thank you, gentlemen. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you.
Julie Elliott.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, everyone. This has been the most fascinating session so far. And I think the one thing that's coming across to me is the opaqueness of what is actually going on. I'm quite shocked, actually, at some of the things I've been listening to. When negotiations or discussions are happening with streaming companies about royalties and monies being divvied up, are artists or their representatives included in those discussions?
Never. No,
Never.
Absolutely not. It hasn't been said in this session yet, so I think I should say it out loud. You'll have seen it in many submissions, but let's remember Spotify, Apple, Tidal, Deezer, none of these services pay artists full stop. They pay only the intermediaries, being labels, publishers, or what we call aggregators, never artists or songwriters directly.
Well, that explains one thing, but do you think artists should be included in these discussions? Do you think there's any way we could get to a point where they were represented in these discussions?
Well, yeah.
It's indirect. I mean, they're represented for certain through their intermediaries, with whom they have done contracts voluntarily. It would be too chaotic to have too many players at that table. In fact, for the purposes of radio, the UK has, since the birth of radio, recognized we don't even want the publishers and the labels at that table. We only want the collective. So, for instance, a radio station only negotiates with PPL or PRS. And to expand that to artists and songwriters in addition to labels and publishers and other intermediaries might be unworkable, would be unworkable.
I would say, in addition to that, is do remember that Spotify pays record label license, and it's going to be the higher of three things. It's going to be the higher of the subscription rate, it's going to be the higher of the streaming rate, and it's going to be the higher of net receipts if there's any marketing monies. So that's receivable under a license, and Spotify pays down 55% to record label. Record label receives that money plus some streaming data. The record label's interaction with the artist is a reproduction. They will never admit, or it is not admitted, that it's a license. So they take the number of streams and then multiply that by effectively a dealer price, which then equates to a royalty. So it could never participate because one is receiving revenue under a license and paying it out under a reproduction model. How could the artist ever participate in the conversation?
I've got an interesting
method of payment and receipt.
An addition to that, Julie, is that, you know, my original record contract that I signed in 1997 says that if my music is licensed, I get paid 50-50. But I am actually paid at my reproduction rate from streaming.
Goodness me.
And why are they allowed to make that decision? Because they control the market.
I mean, this just sounds inherently unfair, and you know, that it clearly is unfair to somebody like me just listening to this. And it's. I mean, I understand what you're saying about the licensing and the reproduction and all of that, but in most business arenas, when negotiations are going on that affect people, I accept every artist couldn't be involved in all of this, but it would seem fair to me that a representative of artists perhaps was involved in this, who could speak up on a more global scale, a bit like a trade union official would be involved in a negotiation, not for the individual, but for the overall.
Julie, I'm a director of PRS. I'm a director of a collection organisation, and artists sit on the board of PPL. So if you introduce equitable remuneration, if you give a right to the creators within streaming, artists will have a say in the licensing of that money for the first time. There are other benefits here. You're essentially talking about, I mean, that's what collective licensing is. We all the artists assign our right via these collection organizations to collect for us, and then we have a right to reply and through them. That's really how it works.
So do you think that would be beneficial then if artists had some representation in these discussions?
Hugely, because by introducing this right, you are not only putting money for the first time in the pockets, directly into pockets of artists and performers instead of into foreign-based corporations, but what you're doing is you're saying we're going to break up the power here as well, because rights are always associated with power. So if you push us into that, it's going to change the balance of the entire market. There's no question about it. Tom?
Having sat in on many of these negotiations between labels, publishers, intermediaries, and the services, it doesn't occur to me that there would be much benefit from the creators behind sitting in, because the intermediary and the creators have mostly converged interests. They want as much out of the streaming service as they can get. So at that level, I'm not certain there's a lot to be gained. There are some details, you're right, because the deals are sometimes manipulated in the favor of the artist or against them. But largely, that negotiation is about the creative side getting as much as they can from the streaming service. However, once that money comes into the hands of the intermediary, whether it's a publisher or a label or another type of intermediary, that's when the artist has to have some kind of say in how that goes. And we've discussed today how most of those relationships are already dictated by contracts that may have been done 10 years ago or 50 years ago. And that's why we're suggesting that the intervention of a radio-like equitable remuneration would be a way for government to intervene without undermining that.
Can I just go back to the very beginning of when someone starts to record music and signs these original contracts? Are they usually given legal advice on what they're signing or what they're signing away? I think is probably more important. What is the norm for this kind of situation?
They will, for the recording agreement to be enforceable, they will have to take independent legal advice. So yes, they do. But what I would suggest is that if you were, say there was a bidding war and you were presented with 3 agreements, and the fundamental terms of the term of the, he that finances it, she that finances it, he that organizes it, she that organizes it, owns the copyright. That's between each one of the offers, that's going to be exactly the same. So you know that once you sign it, those rights are then going to be vested in the record company from release date plus 70 years. And then it goes into the public domain. But there's going to be no instance where those rights will ever revert back to the recording artist. So you can take all the legal advice you want and they will tell you that. But if you've got 3 offers on the table and they're all provide the
And
same.
there's no room for manoeuvre. There's no negotiation around that. It's always the same. Is that what you're saying to me?
No, there are slightly different kinds of contract, but certainly with the three majors, they offer suspiciously similar rights.
It sounds like they're operating as a cartel to me.
I couldn't possibly assert that.
That's what it sounds like to me. Anyway, thank you very, very much. It's really interesting.
Thank you, Julie. Just to briefly follow up on that, taking it at the other end of a career, so to speak, not just a start-up, but basically when you're starting out, but when you're really, really successful, is it possible for artists to sort of break this model through their success, through their sort of bargaining power? I'm thinking about, for example, let's say Taylor Swift, for instance, and the way in which that she has sort of tried to have a very, very sort of different type of business model in terms of her music. What do you think, Tom?
I think that it's clear that something else is happening for really, really top tier artists. And I'm not sure what it is exactly. I think on paper, they appear to be getting the same rights as everyone else, but I'm not entirely sure. Maybe Tom Frederikse it could answer whether all artists are receiving the same deals or whether top tier artists are receiving something else.
There certainly is a difference, as with every industry. Those at the top that are doing better. Largely, you're talking about artists who probably did suffer in their first round of contracts 35 years ago, probably suffered again in their second round, and now in the latter stages of their career, after having proved their ability to open to release a record and command opening day sales, they are able to get much better. So it is true that once you've proven yourself and you're way ahead, then things do even up a lot more than they do. Also, over time, things have improved. Tom was quite coy about royalty rates, but we can say that royalty rates for artists are generally in the category of around 20, 25, 30%, while the label is taking the rest of it. And this is a huge improvement on deals from, say, the early 60s, when bands like the Drifters were getting 2, 3, 4%. And Atlantic Records was taking 96%. So yeah, there is improvement, but it only comes to a point of something like 25-75. And to a certain degree, I don't have a problem with that, because there is a huge investment being made by the record label, and we have to respect that. There is a degree of laissez-faire that we respect here, that the contract is done with, to a certain degree, a willing buyer, willing seller, but certainly not for the young artists. I think if you're looking to relate to this, somebody mentioned writing a book on this panel. If you were writing a novel in the wee hours for 10 years and you had your novel ready and a publisher offered you to publish your novel and they would give you 5% of the royalties, many people would be so flattered and so happy to be published at all that they would grab that deal even against the advice of a lawyer. And that sort of human reaction to praise for one's art plays a big role.
I would suggest that for a newly signed artist with a major record label, and they're going to have a large marketing and promotional fund and expertise behind them, then the going rate for the creative pot is 24%, of which the producer will be paid 4%, so the artist will go down to 20%. And if there is a featured artist, so if another artist features on that, the featured artist record label may demand 7 to 10%. So the artist has gone from 24 to 20, maybe down to 10. For an established artist that is out of contract and is renegotiating a new contract, then that is 30%. And I'm sure there are some dizzy ones that are the very, very highest, but that is, I would say that is what the marketplace is now for newly signed artists with great potential, and for established artists out of contracts who are entering a new contract. That would be the 24-30 would be the going rates.
But this is it. Whenever a share comes out, it's coming out of the artist side. This is the takeaway. It always comes out of the artist side. And of course,
10% or 10%, it's all coming out of the artist. I got what you mean. John Nicholson. So thanks very much for watching. In the next video, we will continue with this first session. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.